Hi and welcome to Unapologetic Women, a podcast about current affairs, culture, politics, life and how we got here. Brought to you by Tony and Saoirse. These are unscripted conversations about things we care about, not things we are experts in. Oh, and there's probably going to be a bit of swearing too.
Hey Saoirse, how's it going?
I'm going well. How are you, Tony?
I'm not bad. I'm on my Canadian journey. Let's just put it that way. I'm currently in Canada, in Vancouver, where you were a while ago.
Vancouver. It's a very rainy city.
Well, it's either beautiful and freezing cold or warm and throwing it down.
Sounds like London, right?
Exactly like London. Oh my God. And talking of London, I have to share a story with you that I want your thoughts. I want to know if I'm going completely insane or if I'm just going insane, actually. Let's put it that way. So I know that the world has evolved quite a bit since Brexit and it's sort of like dropped off of the radar a little bit. But did you, Saoirse, read the story about the British passport?
No.
Okay. Great. Then I can share this with you. Okay. The only way I can describe this story is sort of like a moment of great post-Brexit pride for the Brits. It's this whole idea that, now the Brits are standalone, they're away from the tyranny of the European Union, they're free from those shackles and they can live the life they've always wanted to live. So the Home Office unveiled a couple of weeks ago that great story that we were going back to dark blue passports. So basically the same passports that we had before 1988. Big story. The colour of the passports have changed. This is like back to, the UK taking back power. And the UK Home Office tweeted something along the lines, which was, our new blue passports will be the most technologically advanced and environmentally friendly British passports ever made. And so you can only imagine how this has been championed by Brexiters. But I thought of you because there's two pieces of great irony to it. And there was an incredible Irish clapback. I think it's a clapback.
Clapback. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds very boomer of me, but a very great Irish response. I'm going to stick with clapback. A great clapback to that story. Anyway, so the irony here is twofold. First of all, they could have chosen to stick with a blue passport if they'd wanted to. That wasn't, that was never a thing that they needed to do. But the most hilarious story is that the contracts for these new passports, they were awarded to a French company and they're going to be manufactured in Poland.
Wow.
Yeah. Which,
EU passports.
EU passports for the newly, British people that have been, freed from the shackles of Europe. So there was actually a British competitor to win the passports, but that's kind of the boring part of the story, but they actually lost in the bidding process, which is also the irony. But the Irish clapback to this, which was, so again, going back to the tweet from the Home Office saying that, these new British passports would be the most technologically advanced and environmentally friendly. This Irish person that I actually forgotten who he was, I just remembered that he was Irish, came back saying, my Irish passport is so technologically advanced that it allows me to work, live and study in 27 other countries.
Yes!
Love a good Irish humour there. But and again, I laugh at this, but are you fucking kidding me? This is what we're in?
As a holder of an Irish passport, who is fighting at the moment, I say fighting, but who is in the struggle right now for a green card in the wonderful land of the United States. And it goes back to conversations we always have, Tony, around the concept of borders and globalization versus nationalism. I get it. I understand national identity and culture, but there is something to be said for this concept of being able to freely work and move within 26 countries, right? I don't know. There's something really key about that and how it operated and how it worked. And I'm fascinated, honestly, to see how the next 5 to 10 years roll out for what does it mean to be within Europe as a geographical location, but not be able to have the benefits of the European Union.
And I think the thing why, when listening to you say that, the thing why it hit me so much of, are you kidding me? And the irony of it all is that, so they're now no longer in the EU. And that's the big unveiling. That's the big thing that they have to share. That's the thing that everyone is excited about. The colour of the passport that could have been that same colour right from the beginning. I'm just sat there going, are you, yeah. And it's interesting that you talk about borders, actually, Saoirse, on that point, because there's a brilliant Vice piece that I actually shared recently, but it's kind of old, which is about how, I think the title of it is How Politicians Fool the World into Believing into Nations. And it's another Irish person actually who talks about this. And let me pull up the quote. I've got a couple of quotes here from him, but he basically says this whole thing of how nationalism and the story around nationalism is always going to be used in counterproductive ways or in bad ways. And it's too easy to manipulate that idea of nationalism. And to your point, like, there's nothing wrong with it. People are going to identify, like, I'm personally one of those people who just doesn't identify with borders whatsoever because of my past, having been born in France and grew up in Belgium and British by passport. And I now actually only say British by passport. But it was an Irish Times columnist who said, the difference between a reasonable, healthy nationalism and an unhealthy one is that the former knows it's based on stories and the unhealthy one doesn't, and it denies those existing stories. And there's just something so powerful there.
Well, and I think, especially when I think of my own personal identity, when it relates to a border, someone who is by tongue, has an English accent, wanting and deeply like recognizing and identifying with the Irish community that I grew up in and that I am a part of, but not having the voice or the sound of that accent. And then coming to America with this English accent and people being like, oh, you're South African or you're Australian? And then I turn around and say, no, I'm Irish. And I'm like, but you have an English accent. And there's this like immediate identification with your voice that comes from, as soon as I open my mouth, someone immediately identifies me as British or English. And I personally don't self-identify as British or English. And when I think of storytelling in particular, I think of Ireland, and I've just come back from being with my family for a full week of storytelling and Irish song and music and being together in a very, very close-knit community where 1,500 people come out for a funeral. Like the storytelling and the Irish nationalism that goes along with that is a huge part, in my opinion, of Irish identity.
So you're Irish first. Are you European? Do you ever consider yourself a European?
No, it would never come out of my mouth.
Wow. Even though, where were you born?
London.
Do you identify as a Londoner?
London Irish. And I could sing us a little song. Maybe it's because I'm an Irish Londoner. There's a whole, like, there's the contingency of London Irish is massive.
I'm very disappointed. I thought you were going to do this in an Irish accent. Sorry. I got very giddy here for a moment of, yes, or should, no. That will be
no, but we will edit that out.
No, I love it. And to your point, I'd actually, not being Irish, I never thought about the contingent within the contingent. So the reason why I asked, would you consider yourself a Londoner? For me, it goes European first. I identify as a Brussels person, a Bruxellaire, as they would say in Belgium, and then a Brit. But I would never identify as Belgium because I lived in Brussels, and realistically, I only really identify with the Brussels community. Not that there's anything wrong with the rest of Belgium.
The word British, though, and I think this is a lot to do with like where my family lands in like the Irish and British troubles. Like the word British has such negative connotations for me. And like that was, obviously my family taught me about the history and where I came from and all of that. But I then, when I was able to kind of, best way to describe this, like dig into specific areas of history that I cared about, went down a whole track of understanding 1916 Easter Uprising, Michael Collins, like the actual development of the Irish political system. What does it black and tans actually mean? What was Sunday Bloody Sunday? What are the Northern Ireland Troubles? Why is Protestant and Catholic? Like that whole world has such negative connotations of British for me that when I used to really get like angry when someone would call me British, and it was an irrational anger that I had just decided, like, this is offensive. Do not call me that. But yeah.
And it goes back to, it's interesting because I can get it, but I really can't actually get it to the level that you get it, because and this goes back to my whole education was in the Belgium system. So I never studied British history. And I say British, I did Irish history, the English, like I know very little about that world, but I can tell you a lot about the Belgium. I never got it. It's not taught in Belgium schools. Obviously it's not taught in Belgium schools. And I got it a little bit from my dad, but really the history that I got from my father was the European history. The Treaty of Maastricht, the Treaty of Rome. What were the first 6 founding members of the European Union? Why did the European Union, like that's the history I got from home. So I missed, I think, a whole piece of maybe my heritage, which, you know, being a Brit, that I know nothing about, which is interesting because I think that shaped me as well, that I've heard people talk about English versus British, and I'm kind of like, I get it, but I don't read it because you know.
That is wild to me that a country within Europe wouldn't have in their curriculum other countries' history.
But did you study Belgium history?
We didn't study Belgium history, but we studied American history. We studied France, but as it related to both the world wars. Yeah.
So we did a bit of that. We did Germany and France, but Britain, but it's the British history, I think, that we got from to your point, from the outside perspective. Also, I went to a Belgium Catholic school and it drove my dad absolutely insane. But nearly for the first, I want to say 8 to 10 years, our history course started. Every time we went back to the Egyptians and the Greeks. And my dad was like losing his shit of like, are you kidding me? Like the Egyptians again? Like, really? When are you going to study and learn about World War I and World War II? And like, this is insane. So yeah, I have an in-depth knowledge of the Byzantine times and Greek history, ancient Greece, and it's just bizarre. So not the greatest history curriculum I think I got.
Well, and I also have to preface this with, I also studied history at university. And so I had a much larger and diverse view of the history I was able to kind of dig my teeth into.
Yeah.
And I will say, when I was thinking about my dissertation, I was torn between doing a dissertation on the Troubles in Northern Ireland and how, fast forward to 2012 or whatever it was, 2010, what does it look like now? How is that impacted by the European Union? That was kind of the thread I was going down. And then I completely switched gears and was like, US, I want to live in America. I want to figure it out. And I just like absorbed myself with everything healthcare. Cause then I got into this whole world of NHS. We have the NHS. Why doesn't America have the NHS? What does that mean? And I was really lucky and fortunate to be able to have this diverse view of history from all over the world when I studied it at uni.
You're a history buff. I didn't know this about you. I kind of did, and I didn't really.
I wanted to be an archaeologist.
I did not know that. I didn't know. Really?
Yeah. I used to go and dig in the garden.
As we all did at some point in our lives.
Obviously.
And that's so funny you bring up archaeology, because at Nation Builder, I specifically hired an archaeologist, Sarah, and it was funny because it was one of those, I spoke about it, it's top of mind because I spoke about it only recently, where someone was like, what's the weirdest hire you've ever done? And that for me was one, because it was actually phenomenal, because archaeologists are phenomenal people in tech because they want to figure out what's the root cause of a problem, and they will not stop until they figure out why something broke. And I never thought about that. And she's just phenomenal in, no, I'm going to figure out why we are here in this problem right now and go all the way back. And I was like, that's a bloody brilliant skill set.
Yes. And I want to pull this thread and say, we should talk to Sarah on one of our episodes, because her story, for those of you listening, and Sarah, hopefully you are, it's a fantastic and extremely powerful story that I would love to actually dig our teeth into.
Oh my God, you're spot on there.
Bringing us a little bit back to the current Ireland that we're living in.
Yes.
With Sinn Féin coming up in power and talking about women.
Sinn Féin a little bit for those who don't know so much about Ireland, because I know And when I say talk about it, like people probably, this is the first time they've heard about Sinn Féin, and what it even is. Is it a political party? Is it a person? Like I'm cognizant. Even for me, maybe I should just say, just give me a little bit of a tidbit of what we should know about that.
Absolutely. I am not an expert on this by any means, but will give you my TLDR. Sinn Féin, centre-left to left-wing, Irish Republican political party. Lots of historical ties to the IRA. And so there was a massive kind of downturn in Irish politics. The last 20 years, I want to say, have been split between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, who are the predominant parties in Ireland. This most recent election that just happened 6 weeks ago, February something, Sinn Féin saw a massive rise in political participation with them. They did not run enough candidates, and I'm not going to go into the very, very complex Irish voting system, but they didn't run enough candidates to actually win and be the party of majority. But where they did run candidates, they won overwhelmingly. And they have historically now a woman who is the leader of that party, Mary Lou McDonald. And it's just fascinating to me to think of this, like, what some people perceive as a terrorist organization being the IRA, a nationalist, right-wing, predominantly, Irish focused. Some people say racist, some people say sexist, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. They now have garnished young people really, really active as a part of their political engagement and their strategy as a whole. And they have a woman leader.
Brilliant.
Far
and few between of those these days. So here's a question then for you. And I guess it's a question that I've often asked myself, that we've spoken about at length, is it more important to elect the next female president, prime minister, leader, even if you don't agree 100% with what that person stands for? Or is it more important that we make like that positive is wrong, but we make that positive choice that we absolutely need more women in power?
Well, I think the question there for me that comes from that is gender politics. And do you vote by gender or do you vote by policy? And is gender a policy, right? Like, if I'm thinking about the US right now in 2020, we started the 2020 presidential field with 6 candidates, 5 of which I would say were viable candidates. One of those, what is that lovely woman's name? Marianne Williamson was a candidate that was kind of very much so out of left field, but was absolutely, a candidate who was running. Then we had Elizabeth Warren, absolute powerhouse, own personal love, Amy Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Tulsi Gabbard. So that was kind of the lay of the land in the US of women. Here we are today with 2 white men above the age of 70 running for the Democratic nominee.
Yeah.
Like, what happened? What happened? And if I think personally, I remember in 2016, being in conversations with people saying, America's not ready for a female president in 2016. And thinking, what? No, Hillary, it's Hillary. It's the establishment. Like, she's got Bill behind her. She is in it. She's running. And fast forward to 2020, Kamala Harris had a really strong kind of off the bat, very exciting, lot of momentum behind her campaign. We get into the debates and we start to see that kind of dwindle a little bit, and she's not as strong and not performing as well. We then kind of move forward again. We see Christine Gillibrand out of the race completely. And then we've got 2 strong women, Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar. Elizabeth Warren being on the left, very much so left side of the aisle in the US, focusing on socialist policies. And then you have Amy Klobuchar, who is middle of the aisle, right? Focusing on how do we bridge Republican and Democrat? How do we stop this divisiveness that's happened in the country? She's from the Midwestern woman. And neither of them, if we do reflect back on Super Tuesday, were able to perform in the way that would allow them to sustain and have delegates like you need to in the US to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. And that for me was a very personal hit and devastation on why. Why is it in the US that people feel they can trust a white man more than they can a woman?
Yeah.
And I don't have the answer to it, but it's fascinating.
It feels like it's and this is horrible to say, but it's our historical biases of just, I mean, my dad called me out on this the other day when he said something along the lines of, oh, my boss told me X. And I was like, oh, what did he say? And he looked at me and said, she? I was like, brutal. Because even though I consider myself a feminist, I consider myself trying to figure out how we get more women leaders, how I can help the young women around me. And I still did that stupid mistake of assuming that his boss, and he hadn't put any genders, the brand new boss had no idea. And he just looked at me and said, she actually. And I just sat there, God, just got to school my middle-aged father. Wow. And I think it's that. It has to play a role. And so this is what's interesting for me. And you and I have spoken about this a little bit, is I think we're getting to a point where we're getting better at breaking down those biases that we have. We're getting better at helping women run for office. We're helping. There's a lot of lobbying happening. There's a lot of training happening. But the support is missing when it's, well, now the woman's running. She's up there. She's speaking her mind. She's got the years of training and the backing. She's now actually getting the money, getting in the donations and the support there. And yet we're still bringing them down.
And Tony, that brings up a thing that you and I talked about earlier in the week, right? When looking at companies and organizations, non-profits, whatever we want to call them, like Emily's List and like She Should Run and Vote Run Lead, etc. And a woman who I respect very deeply, who was working with the Elizabeth Warren campaign, Linda Tossi, shared out on Twitter earlier this week, berating Emily's List. And I honestly agree with her around this. Okay, great. We want more women to run for office. But we need these organizations and these entities who put women out there to run for office to actually put a stake in the ground and endorse one of those women, and not just stand there and say, oh my God, it's great. We have 6 women running. No, we now need the actual tactical support, the field work, the comms work, the political work that those entities and organizations have the manpower and women power to do, but weren't willing to stick a stake in the ground and say, I endorse this candidate. I'm going to let go of the other 5 females. Well done for getting in the race. But here I am. This is the woman I back.
And it's interesting because it feels to me like what is needed is that balance between not favorism, but we're going to do our damn best and work a little bit harder to get more women into office. But once they're there, we're going to treat you equally. So we're going to put a stake, because that's what it felt like with the lack of calling out or calling a preference or putting a stake in the ground. And you mentioned also that the New York Times had done it. They just like, well, we're endorsing both. No, we don't need you to then hover around us or tiptoe around us or feel this feeling of walking on eggshells because you might piss off one of the women in the race. No, call it out. So there's this thing of how do you balance that of we need help, we need support. But once we're in it, we've proven that we're good enough. Now pick one of us to run because it does feel like without choosing, we've lost all of them.
And the New York Times piece, Tony, I'm glad you brought that up because that was such a shock for me. The New York Times endorsement of a presidential candidate has always been a thing I've looked to of like, oh, where are they going? Like, what does this speak for the field? And they came out and had the audacity, in my opinion, to endorse Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. That is just not, that to me is ill-informed journalism. Like you can't come out when people are looking at the New York Times endorsement as a thing that like will potentially weigh into where they'll vote. Why is the New York Times endorsing them? This is a reputable institution that has been around for decades, right? Like, coming out and them saying we endorse both because we need a woman in office. It was nice. It was a fluff piece. But why didn't you come out and say we endorse Elizabeth Warren because this is her background and her standing? It doesn't matter that she's a woman. Yeah. We endorse Elizabeth Warren because of this, right? Like, the same way that they would have done if they endorsed Joe Biden. Because I can tell you right now, they would not have come out today and said, we endorse Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Well done, lads. It's just not a thing.
It's funny. I wonder, first of all, thank you for sharing that because I actually didn't know that the New York Times endorsement was just like it feels like it's a bit of an institution, a thing that they do that people look out for. I actually didn't know that to that extent, which actually makes it that much more worrying that when it comes to women, people can't choose. And for me, it just feels too nice. Like, it's the only way I can describe it, or the only explanation I have for it, of we don't actually need you to be nice. We need you to fucking elect us. Full stop.
It's 2020. Like, yeah, oh my goodness, how amazing is it we had 6 women running for office? But we're still people. We're still candidates. The same way you would have picked if it was 6 men running. You wouldn't have put 2 men on the bloody New York Times endorsement. You just wouldn't have.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing for me, that gender politics comes up here, where the question is, okay, there's 6 women running, but I don't want to upset the other one. There's also 10 men running, right? Like, you picked between them. You had no problem doing that.
Yeah.
Why? Why is that the case? And how do we change it?
Because to your point, we definitely have. And God, we used to talk about this at length at Nation Builder with, we're providing tools and software to lower the barrier to entry, to get more people to run for office. It shouldn't be so timely. It shouldn't be so expensive. It shouldn't be so hard to run for office. So by lowering the barrier to entry, by providing everyone the tools and the software they need, that's great. And then there was always that question in the back of many of our minds of, are we doing enough? Because we know that running for office is actually really scary. And we know that once you're there, the amount of harassment that you get, and especially when you're a woman, the amount of social media hatred that you get. Are you ready for that? Are we? It also feels just too, again, fluffy to just say, run, it's great, we're going to help you run, but oh shit, once you're there, we're not unsure how to do it. You're a little on your own, which does feel that we're missing the opportunity to set these women up for success. Absolutely.
Like, I think about kind of the campaign infrastructure as a whole, and I think back to something that you've said to me 100 times, Tony, around like when you're looking for speakers and women, and it's put at the infrastructure around it is such that it's like during morning school drop-off or pick-up or whatever the thing is. Yeah. It's exactly the same in the campaign world. Like, if you have children, if you have young children in particular, you're as running for president of the United States, you are flying from one side of the country to the other, from this state to that state. That is a 40-hour day in 24 hours. Yeah. And that's the expectation of running for president of the United States. And it's not that drastic if you're running for Congress, if you're running for Senate, but you still have these like very intensive days where you're running, and there isn't universal childcare in this country to support you. Right. So if you are lowering the barriers to entry, women have they have a mountain before them, right? Just walking in the door of that. And we as a country, as the US, and the political infrastructure here doesn't have the support mechanisms in place to allow for a 32-year-old woman to run for office. I think is it Finland? The 34-year-old woman, right? Like that, genuinely. Yeah, I cannot foresee a world in which that happens in the United States, at least in the next 10 years.
It's so interesting that you bring up both Finland, universal childcare. There's a brilliant piece, and we will link it at the bottom of the episode, but from the Harvard Business Review that I read a couple of weeks ago, which was a woman explains that she had 2 best friends, both ambitious women, white, college educated, upper middle class. They both work in very rewarding but very challenging jobs, and they both got married, and they both had children, and they both went on maternity leave. One of them lived in America, and the other one lived in Stockholm. So one in Seattle, one in Stockholm. And the stark contrast made me want to pick up my laptop and throw it through a fucking wall, because for 2 reasons. One, I have only been in America for less than 2 years, and already my barrier of acceptance has lowered. So when I hear someone say, oh, I got, 3 months off, I'm like, oh, that's good. And I'm like, no, this is not okay. And so this Harvard Business Review is just so brilliant in taking 2 very, very similar women who go through 2 big life moments, and their experience is so wildly different from the amount of time, the amount of state support, how much it costs for the childcare. One was putting in, 30 grand a year, and the other one was that it was actually capped in Stockholm. It's actually capped at 1,000 per year. You can't be, the number is wrong, but it's actually capped by the government. And again, and it's just wild. And things like the state actually pays for the childcare, and the state actually pays for when you go on maternity leave, not your company. So of course the company's like, go do it, have fun. Like, you need this time. You're going to be a better. So it's a story definitely worth reading. And the Harvard Business Review, a lot of it is behind paywall, but I think you're allowed to read 3 articles a month. So we'll definitely share it. But that story just
maternity leave and I believe it is still a fact that the United States is still the only country that does not have guaranteed federal maternity leave and pay.
I think there's 2 other countries, but they're terrible countries. You don't want to be on that list of countries.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And it's like whatever the acronym is, I'm forgetting for first world country, is it? I can't even think of it, Tony. It's like non-third world country, basically.
That's all I'm going to say. But
yes. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it's supposed to be America, the greatest place, the land of the free, the melting pot.
In a democracy, that's the kind of shit that we shouldn't have to. And I remember hearing people say I can't go back to work because the nanny is going to cost me more than what I would make. My job. Can you imagine? And I mean, that's also the privilege of someone who can afford a nanny or looking at a nanny in the first place.
Exactly. And I see it right now. I've got a friend at home who is back in London who just had her little boy five months ago.
Yeah.
And she, wants to go back to work, wants to be able to actually provide for her family. And she's looking at daycare now, and the cost of it is just astronomical.
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't weigh up to what the wages are that you're actually bringing in. And so people have to make this decision of, do I stay home with my child and not bring in any income?
Yeah.
Or do I work extra hours to be able to afford childcare and then not really see my child?
Yeah. Choices that, going back to your point about how we ended up talking about this, but it's not set up for the everyday woman, let alone someone who wants to try and run the country, let alone someone who wants to, get herself elected. And the word electable, comes to mind here. Of the other flip side of that coin is, and I feel like we're hearing less of this argument, but I think it's still to the point of why we're not electing these women is, well, if she's on the campaign trail, who's looking after the kids? Where are the kids? I'm so worried about the kids. Shouldn't she be at home? Is she a good mother? Like, and I always joked about this with American presidents, that you had to be married, had to be a Catholic, Christian, believe in something, and have a dog. And those were the 3 things that you seem to have when you want to run for office in America. And clearly the one thing missing is you have to be a man too, apparently, these days.
And I will, there's a silver lining in my head right here, which is Ursula, the president of the European Commission, who has 7 children.
Yeah.
And is the president of the European Commission, right? So I think there are places in the world where we are seeing serious advancements for women in office and the ability to do that. But it's like, how do we actually put in the US lens, particularly, obviously we're both here and living here. How do we take what we're seeing from the European Union and from Finland and wherever else it is, where women in particular are being allowed, and actually not allowed is the wrong word, being empowered to actually lead when they have 7 children or they are 32 or whatever the thing is. But yeah. And
there's 2 parts to that. There's the, how do we make it normal, feel normal? Like that of just like, gosh, going back to my mistake of my answer should have been, oh, who was she? And I would have preferred my dad going, oh, no, sorry, sadly, it's a him, versus me doing that, getting into but then there's also the way that our society is set up. When you look at that stark contrast of those Nordic countries in the European Union versus America, it's government funded. It's supported by the government. All of that has been in place and is in place to support this. And those small, I think people have yet to realize, or maybe they do realize, but the extent to which it impacts everyday aspect of the fact, and we're seeing this actually right now with coronavirus, of people saying, allow your workers to work from home. There's still so many companies that don't allow the work from home. You can't have a paid sick day off. So the choice is, can I pay for rent at the end of the month, or do I stay at home, take care of myself, and don't get other people sick? It's all good. For me, it goes back to how the society is set up and what's been institutionalized and what's been, and I think we forget how all of these little things, again, we're sat in a position of privilege. It's a privilege to say, and I remember getting in an argument of the work from home piece when you're sick. It's actually about how much you care about your other teammates. If you're sick, I don't need you to prove to me that even if you're sick, you can still work. I need you to show to me that you care enough about your teammates that you don't want to get everyone else on your team sick. Again, that's such a privileged thing to be able to say, because so many people don't have that opportunity, or just don't get paid when they get a sick day.
Yeah, and don't have the actual ability to do their job from home.
There's that as well.
And I was watching, when you say the coronavirus there, Tony, I was watching CNN this morning. They were talking about the pharmaceutical companies that had come together at the White House to announce that any anti-vaccine or whatever that is comes out for the coronavirus will be free. And the insurance companies came together and said there will be no co-pays for anyone who is going in to be impacted by the coronavirus. That, for me, for someone who genuinely has like an unnecessary amount of knowledge about the healthcare system in this country, is phenomenal. I don't know if it was done for SARS. Obviously, I know the US wasn't as impacted by SARS as the coronavirus, but it hopefully, to me, it gives hope, right? Like, I'm seeing these massive insurance agencies who the country has been demonizing, in particular for the last 8 months, with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, in particular, leading that charge, coming together today and saying, actually, the health of the world and the global impact is more important than our bottom line. And that gives me some type of hope, in the same way that Ursula, right, is giving me some type of hope that there is a shift, that there is a change that can impact world health as well as women running for office and women in leadership. And so hopefully we'll have a better place that is equal for all.
I love that. That feels, I want us to end on that notion and thoughts of hope. But the healthcare piece is interesting. I definitely want to dig into that one a little bit more, because you're right, always being demonized, but not always the case.
Yeah. Well, healthcare, that's definitely a whole episode.
I can't wait to hear about all your knowledge about the healthcare sector, specifically in America, which I'm still struggling to understand because it's wackadoodle to me.
You just need a lot of money. The TLDR to live. Yep.
Saoirse, it was lovely hanging out with you again.
Always fantastic.
Thank you too. Thank you everyone for joining us and for sticking with us until the end. Welcome to all of the new people. Hope you enjoyed your first episode. You can always get all of the episodes at www.unapologeticwomen.co, or you can also follow us on Instagram, and you can find all of these on all of the places you would normally get your episodes. Thank you, and talk to you next week.